Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the David Mathas podcast. I'm your host, David Mathas, and I have a really great guest today. And the reason why I feel like this guest is awesome and it's a great topic to talk about, not only because him and I have connected for over a year now, I think, on social media, but we both have suffered from obsessive compulsive disorder. And he is actually a doctor. It's Dr. Nick Pannella. He is a chiropractor out in Colorado Springs. Really great guy, puts out a lot of great little 2, 3, 4 minute videos talking about different topics on his Instagram. And I'm going to leave all his information down below. But Nick, thank you so much for coming on, man. I'm glad we finally got to connect. Obviously we've connected a lot over social media, but to actually sit down and get this podcast going, I think it's great.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me on. It's really funny you say that. I had a friend of mine ask me recently, how did you become friends with like Hunter Pauly or iShack or Chris Barakat or Ogus? And I say, I just annoyed them on Instagram until they became my friends. That's
How it
just,
works on social media now, man.
it's really interesting. And I think that something about social media, one of the definite positives about it, because there's definitely, some negatives as with everything.
For sure.
It just lets you to connect with people in a way that has never been known, prior to social media, which is a very unique aspect for conversation.
It absolutely is. I mean, I sometimes sit back and think, like, the last 3.5, 4 years, like, how did I get to where I'm at? Not that I'm anywhere near where I want to be, but how did I get to where I'm at? And how am I friends, at least acquaintances and stuff, with some of the people that I'm acquaintances with? Like, and I realized, listen, it's the same way that I got into grad school. It's the same way that I got to working with Lane. Is I just took a chance. I reached out. I introduced myself, and you know what? I wasn't afraid to say, or I wasn't afraid to hear no. And you know what? Some no's occurred along the way, but plenty of yeses occurred. And some of my closest friends are people that I met in the industry over the last few years.
It's absolutely, I think as both of us being, business owners in their own sense and what we
Yeah.
do. And I'm 1099. I don't know if you're 1099 as
Yep.
well. So I think one of the, statistically speaking, when you look at the job, I think this is global, not just for the American population, but if you look at any longitudinal study of the large data, most people hate their jobs. They hate them.
Yep.
And I tell my friends, I have a lot of people I talk to, and they always, ask me, how did you make the jump? I say, well, you have to be able to take risk. If
Mhm.
you aren't okay with uncomfortability and uncertainty, and as humans, as you've seen my stuff, we're highly obsessed with certainty. It's why
100%.
the everything going on with society right now, whatever your views are on anything, it really comes down to people are obsessed with this certainty.
Yeah.
And we get in the car and drive every day, and hundreds of people die in every state every day in car accidents. It's just a reality of life, you
Yeah, it's
know?
not a given. Tomorrow's not a given. And
No.
that was one thing that I kind of really took away from my circumstance as far as almost dying and from my eating disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder was that, listen, tomorrow's not guaranteed. I mean, do I wake up every single day with that mentality? I'm not going to sit here and say I do, right?
Of course.
But
Of course.
more often than not, that is one of the first things that I wake up. I give thanks. I pray. I give thanks. I give appreciation for. Literally, I just say thank you, God, for giving me another day. That's all I say, and then whatever's going to happen from there happens. And I think that I'll let you get into your OCD story too and everything, but guys, that's what this podcast is really going to be about. It is obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, just some mental health issues in general, because I think it's far more common than people realize. And one thing that I always really got annoyed with, or I have been really annoyed with, is when people just jokingly say, "Oh, I'm got OCD because I like to keep my house clean," right? Or something like that. No, we're going to get into our stories. We're going to get into how debilitating OCD actually really is. And I think a lot of exposure that you and I have both gone through in our own journeys and stuff probably opens our eyes a little bit more to the fact that tomorrow's not given, right? Like, we have to just focus on what we can focus on now and live our lives that way moving forward. And knowing that it's not going to be easy every single day. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be things that you're always going to have to try to overcome. But going through some of the things that we went through, I think is going to hopefully really help some people. So why don't you talk a little bit about your practice and then also your OCD journey?
Sure. So my wife and I own a company called Axon Health PC. It's a corporation. Originally, it was an LLC, but in the state of Colorado, being a chiropractor, I am legally not allowed to hire a medical doctor as a chiropractor, but my corporation can. It's one of those loopholes for business purposes.
Okay.
So we moved to a corporation. Yeah, it's so the end goal for ourselves is a multidisciplinary practice with mostly corporate wellness is kind of where we're going. We have a couple corporate wellnesses now.
Okay.
I think corporate wellness is a great. The biggest study ever done on corporate wellness is called the RAND study. It's completely anyone can look it up. It's basically looking at 10,000 people over 30 years and realizing that one of the things that they know about corporate wellness is that they care in the beginning about their ROI. But what they realized 2 to 3 years after a good corporate wellness, it was a term I'd never heard. They cared about their VOI, their value of their investment, which I actually like that terminology now.
I do too.
And when 10,000 people they interviewed and they asked them, major companies, big corporate wellnesses, Google, Yahoo, stuff like that, what are you going to miss the most about this company? Over 80% said the corporate wellness. Statistically speaking, the average person misses 5 days a week, 5 work days a year in going to doctor's appointments. So if I can bring the value to them, they can come down to our vans, our RVs that we retrofit. They can maybe get their blood work done. They can have their personal training session in the parking lot. People who don't need the equipment that we use. Because sometimes it could be hard for people like us because we love what we do.
Yeah.
But you and me both have patients clients who say, I don't care about going to the gym. That's completely fine. They just want to be actively fit, whether it's plyometrics or bands or whatever.
Absolutely.
So
I think honestly, going through COVID and everything, I learned that a lot more about a lot of my clients than I even thought. Like, they're like, it's okay that the gym's closed. I just want to stay active. And I'm like, well, this just made this a whole lot easier and more fun.
Exactly.
You don't have to stress out about no gym. You just want to be active. I applaud that. That should always be everybody's first and foremost goal. Be healthy, be active, and then whatever goals come after that are great from a physical and health standpoint, I think.
Of course. Yeah. And I think my wife and I are cash only. The number one thing I would say that we both get, I don't never spend less than 30 minutes with a patient. I don't believe in the 2 to 3 minute manipulation adjustment. The reason, the philosophy I have, and I have a lot of people joke with me and they said, are you a physical therapist? So I believe in active care. Now, it's an intelligent manner. You're not going to take someone with, say, a hot disc who's having ridiculous symptoms and load them immediately, because that's not an intelligent decision and the data doesn't correlate with that.
Okay.
So spinal manipulation, Graston, cupping can have their place in scenarios. They're passive care. But the biggest problem with chiropractic is, and we've all heard this, I go to my chiropractor twice a month for 10 years because I need it. More than likely, you don't need that. I have a lot of kickback in my profession from that. I don't like saying the evidence-based side of care anymore because it tends to put people down. As I'm sure if you watch my videos, I'm very big on trying to see things from other perspectives, even if I don't agree with them at all. I will try and listen, which isn't always easy.
The world needs more of that, man. I'll tell you.
It's tough. It's tough for all of us. I mean, it really is. We see things through our lens, our perspective.
Listen, we're all going to have our I don't want to say bias, but we're all going to have our opinion, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Maybe you have a different viewpoint on something than I have, and maybe it won't change my opinion one bit, right? Does that mean I'm right and you're wrong, or you're wrong and vice versa, or whatever? Who knows really in the end? Because all we know is what's presented in front of us at the time, right? We know,
100%.
Okay, at this juncture, going right seems like a little bit better than going left, right? And that wasn't really supposed to be a euphemism for the world as it is right now in the country, but it kind of is. But I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like we have to come to a head. We have to confront an issue and decide in this moment, based on what I know, is this way better or is this way better? And that's kind of what helped me a little bit towards my overcoming my OCD too. But we'll get into that in a minute. You go ahead.
Absolutely.
I kind
Yeah.
of
So,
I kind of jump around and interrupt a little bit. So
oh, you're talking to the king of ADHD. I mean, you see all the stuff yeah, yeah. No, trust me, I get that. So, I always tell people, like, I had a patient today. I met with him for the first time. It was an unfortunate scenario I see time and time again.
mhm,
He comes to me, he's like, listen, I flipped multiple cars. I've been seeing a chiropractor every other week for 16 years. I say, okay. Have you seen relief? They usually say yes, or else they wouldn't be going, I would think.
right.
Are you at where you want to be at? No. Okay, well, tell me what you don't like. He doesn't listen to me. He spends 3 minutes with me. He adjusts me and leave. I understand the perspective of the chiropractor who does that from the monetary value, but you're doing short-term gain for long-term pain is what I like to say. You're thinking about the monetary value in short term, and you're really kind of throwing the value you can provide, because a lot of people ask questions like, I didn't know you got stuff like that at school, or like, I took 6 nutrition classes at school taught by a guy who had very good peer-reviewed studies done, like really in-depth ones on blood markers and stuff. And a lot of the stuff that we see, I didn't want to bring it up, so I'm going to bring it up for 1 second. But like Dr. Fung or Dr. Axe, it's unfortunate, but I think all of us know, no matter what field you're going to be in, I have Dr. Axe and Fung. Dr. Nadolsky has Dr. Oz. We have these very, 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 very loud, irrational voices that people like to stick to because of fix me right now. So what I do is, if I'll look at someone with, say, a lumbar issue, and I say to them, has anyone ever looked at your hip stability? They'll say, no. I said, well, if you think about it like this, if we look at, let's say, and everyone goes to stretching. They're like, oh, well, I stretch my piriformis. I said, that's great. But have you ever tried stabilizing your piriformis? Simple stuff like banded clamshells. We're talking like the bottom. And I say, let's working through an active care plan and kind of like straying away from those passive modalities because they become so reliant on it. It's almost like a drug. They're reliant on the spinal manipulation. And no matter, I don't even go into the neurophysiologic about gate theory. None of that matters. The reality is this. You can spinal manipulate someone's lumbar spine every month for 10 years. That's not going to fix the core stability problem that they're missing.
Right.
This is why it's important to teach basic stuff. You know how many patients I say this to them? Do you know what anterior and posteriorly pelvic tilt means? They say, no clue. Do you know what a piriformis is? Not a clue. Glute med, no clue. Hip abduction, no clue. They just don't know. They just know, rack them and crack them, and they leave. And it's starting to phase out because people will say to me, they'll be like, aren't you afraid you're not going to get patients for life? I said, look what you just said to me. You're so afraid of the money. The money will be there. Forget the value.
Yeah.
It's about providing and we all know this. If you're too far evidence, in my opinion, you've lost. If you're too far anecdotes, you get wishy-washy. And if you only listen to the patient, both of the other ones go out the window.
Yeah, I like to tell my clients when I start working with them, I mean, they realize I'm evidence-based, and that's kind of a little, my background. I have a master's in exercise science. I've been on 4 peer-reviewed studies and everything, research studies. And I like to tell them, listen, I'm not married to evidence-based though. Like, I take evidence-based and I take you and I mesh you two together, and that's our starting point, right? Now, where we have to go from there, maybe it's evidence-based, maybe it's anecdotal. We don't know, right? But you have to have evidence as a starting point, and then from there you have to be flexible. And I like what you said about, so many people are worried about having clients for life and the money and everything. And listen, talent's going to keep you bringing in clients. It's going to keep you bringing in money. Who do you think is more likely to recommend you to somebody else? Someone that's been coming to you for 10 years with no relief, or someone that's come to you for 2 times and they got relief? So maybe you lose out on that client, whatever, but maybe you pick up 3 more clients, right?
Exactly.
People are so focused on, they're so focused on things that aren't important. You have to rehone your focus onto what is happening right now, make the best of it, do the best you possibly can, provide value for that client or patient or whatever, and do what you intended to do with this profession, your profession or my profession in coaching, and that is get them to their healthiest place and move on, teach them skills to continue and everything.
I 100%, I couldn't agree more. And it's really funny because I always tell people I have standard recommendations I put to patients if I don't have maybe say, because I have different things I do. Like I have certain patients, that I just do macronutrient stuff with them. I being someone who's, there's just no other way around it. I think a lot of people in the industry learned about flexible dieting for either Lyle McDonald or Lane. Like, it was just the Lyle, little crazy guy out there.
Yeah.
So I remember looking at Lane's, his power hypertrophy adaptive program on muscular development when I was in college, thinking, wow, this is a total different way of training that makes sense to me in a way that's nonlinear as it was. I always recommend people Fat Loss Forever. I've probably gotten a solid amount of people to buy that. I think it's a terrific book. RP as well. I have a lot of people that say they don't want coaching, but they want direction. I say, well, why don't you look at one of the RP 3-day templates, or something like that. So I think, and then we'll go to the OCD stuff. I think something that hinders a lot of people like you, me, medical doctors, physical therapists is when they leave school, I've had my friends say to me, they're like, man, I am never reading. I am never going to another class ever again. Now that's your prerogative. You could do what you want, but I think that you might be doing your patients a little bit of a disservice if you do that, because as you and me both know, research is suggestive at best. And then we have
always changing.
Always changing. The stuff that RP talks about now, if we're using RP, having a metabolite focused block. No one talked about that 3-4 years ago. I've also been a member of Mass Research Review for 2 years, so I get a lot of good reviews from them. I've had a couple conversations with Greg Knuckles over DM. There's a lot of good resources out there now. Absolutely. But unfortunately, as we both know, this doesn't sell. This is what I always say. You love this. Okay. Imagine if I went on TV, you and me. I said, hey guys, we did your analysis. It looks like you have to reverse diet for 4 months and take a slow approach, taking your 3-month potential diet phase and making it into a year. Slow turtle. People would be like, no way. But people like this in the People magazine, I lost 50 pounds in 1 month.
Yeah.
So we live in a society that has such low frustration tolerance.
Absolutely. We live in an Amazon Prime world where everybody wants it right now. And that's one of the biggest issues that I face coaching. And that's why I do free consults prior to someone signing up for coaching, because I don't want them to be surprised and think that they're getting some 30-day fat loss program or something like that. I've lost plenty of clients because I've been completely honest with them that, listen, you need to be in a reverse for 6 months to a year. Like, you're not ready to do a fat loss. And you know what? That's fine, because I sleep better at night knowing that I at least did my part to give them the information that they need. What they do with it, they're adults. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and be responsible for them. But I feel like it's my duty, and you're a doctor, like, it's our duty. As long as you're in this for the right reasons, whatever your profession is in the healthcare field, you have to be in it to want to help people. And this is not a quick money-making thing. The money will come when the talent is there. And that's what I've learned over the years. That's what you're learning over the years. It's when you provide quality, you get quantity.
Wow, I like that. And the one I really like is from 2018, the CrossFit Dubai Open. Matt Frazier was eating and he said this. He said, if you have something worth bragging about, you don't need to do it because people will do it for you. Ooh. That has stuck with me for 3 years. I think about that quote like 4 times a week. He was very simple. He goes, everyone's like, why don't you brag? Why don't you brag? He said, just like that. If you have something worth bragging about, you don't need to because people will do it for you.
Listen to this one. I'm actually going to make a post on this week. if it's worth it enough for you to complain about, then it's worth it enough for you to commit to take action towards.
That's 100%. And then we could talk about, we'll add this into the OCD stuff. And
Yeah.
we definitely, and then we'll start, actually, well, this is how we'll transition in, but negativity is 100%, in my opinion, and a decent amount of data. It's a habit. I mean, if you surround
Yeah.
yourself with a bunch of negative people, it's difficult. It's really difficult to get, and it's hard in certain situations.
Well, it's
You
the
know,
same thing like if you're with a bunch of happy people, how difficult is it to be pissed off and angry when everyone around you freaking just like laughing? And that's great. Like, I'm not making fun of anybody like that, but it's hard to be in a bad mood when you're around a bunch of happy people, right?
it is. Yeah,
But it's
it makes
also hard to be in a good mood when you're around a bunch of people that are pissed off about what they're doing and where they're at and what their life has become. It's all about that energy, that flow around you.
Yes, and there's definitely an unspoken. It's definitely odd, but I'll transition this into basically my story in how I got to where I am.
Okay.
My father was a compulsive hoarder. Now, he was a partner at a big firm, so he had a very large salary, which could keep his compulsive behavior alive. Now, I don't think my dad had what I like to call clinical OCD, as you and me have. We're on the more chronic format, as some people are like kind of teetering between the gene being expressed.
Right.
I think before we go any further, it's important to talk about this right now. The current literature supports, like everything, OCD is more than likely a genetic disorder because multiple people on my side of my family have OCD. Two of my cousins have chronic OCD and my dad. They believe the gene, if I believe, is called, go ahead.
That's really interesting because nobody in my family has it. Like, everybody is, I mean, listen, we have a lot of type A personalities, right? Like, we like organization, but I never even had a history of it growing up. Like, I was very flexible. My family is, so it's really interesting to hear. I'm curious about what you're about to say here.
So the gene that they believe is connected with OCD itself is the Q115 P115. Now we know we have what's called OCRDs, obsessive compulsive related disorders, impulsive gambling, compulsive pornography and sexual addictions. They put them in a category almost like a pie chart where they could see that there's very similar issues, but obsessive compulsive disorder in itself is now what they believe in the DSM-6 when it comes out, going to be classified. It is an anxiety disorder. It will probably be classified as its own separate disorder now and not in the realm of anxiety disorders. 20 years
I'm glad
ago,
that that's going to happen because
yes.
it is, and you said something at the very start of that your dad had the means to keep his compulsions going, right?
You know who else had that?
Me, but go ahead.
Howard Hughes.
Howard Hughes, because he had the money to do it too. But I was going to say, I was in an environment, the military, that breeds repetition, and being prepared and all that stuff. That's one of the things that fed mine. All, not blaming the military. I'm just saying it's the environment. Like, and that's really interesting that you brought that up because, I kind of talked about that in my book, how it was just the perfect environment for me to develop the OCD, even though it had stuff to do with things a long time ago, right? It was the perfect environment, the perfect storm to bring that out in me. And for your dad, having a lot of money allowed him to do it and not have to worry about, oh, I can't carry out my compulsions because I don't have enough money to. He didn't have to worry about that.
Exactly. And I think Brene Brown said it the best. She said, genetics load the gun, environment and lifestyle pull the trigger. Yep. So you might have had someone in your family. This is what they also know. They believe, they don't know for sure, that 2% of the population has the gene. Now, does that mean 2% express chronic OCD? Of course not. 40% of women have the BRA gene. 40% of women do not get breast cancer. Right. Your environmental factors, statistically, lifestyle, cultural backgrounds, all bring you to a point. Now, I don't know if this is how it was for you, but I'm sure it was in a way. Chronic OCD turns on like a light switch. Like, a lot of people don't realize that. It snaps. One minute, it's very easy to go, well, I didn't have OCD before. Like, wait a second, how am I here?
Yeah.
So, and it's funny that you said that. So this is the best way I describe OCD to people. Instead of yelling at them about, because I did do this when I was extremely suffering in the mental hospital, you don't say these words, hey guys, I'm a little HIV. You
No.
don't say that. You either have HIV or you
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
You have OCD or you don't. Now, I tell people perfectionistic tendencies and quirky behaviors are very common in everyday life based on irrational beliefs. But when you explain what, this is a good drill they do at conferences.
Mm-hmm.
They have people write, therapists take a piece of paper and write on a piece of paper a violent way they would kill their spouse or their child. Some of them are like, I'm not writing that down. Then they write them down and they have them go like this. I want to kill my kid with a knife. I want to kill, and they say, think about that being locked for 10 years, 24 hours a day.
You know, I used to think that I don't want to say I've always, but I think I've always had some sort of tendency of perfectionism. Like I just like it. I think that, you know, listening to what you just said about how chronic OCD just kind of hits you, you know, thinking back on it and everything, I don't think I really, and I didn't figure this out until therapy afterwards, but I don't think I really thought of it as OCD until I started thinking back about how I used to lie and get out of things and do, you know, maneuver things around because I was afraid that I wasn't going to get to eat a meal at a certain time. And I talk about this in my book. I would wait until a certain time on my microwave to hit start to make a meal. That is how, I mean, and that's just one example of how deep it was, but you know, having to walk the same loop all the time, doing things like that, waking up at the exact same time on my clock every single day. If I was up before that, I would lay in bed until it hit that time on the clock and then get up. But I never really thought of it as OCD at the time until I went through therapy and realized, like, man, when you change your life around, when you have panic attacks because you can't do something, you know, that's more than perfectionism. That is a true illness right there.
It's a disorder. It's absolutely a disorder. So how it started for me was in grad school. My father died of pancreatic cancer when I was about a year in the school. I definitely had zero strategies of moving with acceptance in life. So I buried all my emotions. I came from that like full Italian father. My dad and I never said I love you to each other once, and we loved each other. I never once said I love you. He never said it to me. We buried our emotions. So I was in a high state of anxiety, and I was suffering with bilateral tinnitus for about 4 months. But it was so bad that I kept saying to myself, this is not like normal tinnitus. Why am I so afraid in the fear cycle?
Mm-hmm.
So I was driving through Ponce Inlet, and I had a thought. What happens if you never stop thinking about your blinking again? Boom, boom. In that moment, I latched to somatic OCD, which lasted for about 18 months. Now,
so explain to everybody what somatic OCD is.
Somatic OCD is obsessions about neutral things. So blinking, swallowing, saliva, and breathing are the biggest. Next to heartbeat, bridge of the nose. And what keeps people in the cycle is the irrational fear of, if I notice this for the rest of my life will be ruined. This is why it's important to look at the fear cycle that we have, breaking down the beliefs, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So after about 2-3 weeks, it switched to saliva and swallowing. And I noticed here's how I describe people what it was like living with this for 12 months. I say, take 2 Capri Suns, put the things in and put them under your mouth and squeeze 24 hours a day, all day. That's how intrusive the sensation was at every moment of my life.
It controls your life, everything.
Controls my life. I ended up in a mental hospital. I tried jumping out of a moving car. I tried to kill myself. My wife had to call the police. They took me to a mental hospital, November of 2019. I have suffered severely with sex and pornography addiction. I'm very open about that. People do not like talking about that. Yeah. My wife, if you saw, my wife was very open about talking about that on her page. And in the beginning, my wife comes from a very conservative Canadian background. You know, she said to me, I don't know if my grandparents are going to want to see this. And I said to her very rationally, the more we don't talk about this, the more people are going to kill themselves. because this is a
True.
very, very
True.
serious problem. You know, the shame revolved around, when, not to get off topic, someone could say this: I am a heroin addict, I need help. I've had multiple friends who have recovered from heroin addictions. But for some reason, a child going to their parent and saying, I think I have a pornography addiction,
Mhm.
that is still very shameful in society. We look at it from a shameful viewpoint.
I think, and this is how I've thought about my obsessions and compulsions and things. I didn't have pornography or anything like that, but I kind of break all of that down into just a control issue. Like, you're trying to take control back. So for some people, it might manifest in pornography and sex addiction. For some people, it might manifest in food compulsion, exercise compulsion. Hell, it might manifest in gardening for somebody, you know?
Anything.
It does not matter. That's why I'm very glad. I'm glad that you brought that up, and I respect you for bringing that up and pointing out the fact that it's nothing to be embarrassed about, because I don't think it's about the act per se. I think that it's just a means of trying to tame that control that you feel like you have no control over, right?
Of course.
And it's just, you know what? Yeah, maybe someone judges you for this outlet or that outlet or drugs or whatever. That doesn't matter. The point is those aren't the root causes of things. The root cause is something that's happening inside of you that you need to get control of, right? And your environment is going to dictate what route you go. I mean, for me in the military, it was compulsive exercising because we were always physically active. And it was taking back control of my food because I never knew what I was going to freaking eat. Like, I got 2 minutes in basic training to eat a meal, move on. You never know what you're going to get. So my fear, and you brought up fear, which was really, really interesting. My fear of other things took over and manifested in controlling my food and controlling my exercise and things like that, or not controlling it, I guess, is a way to look at it too. But I'm glad you brought that up, man. I respect you for that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It definitely was not something that I didn't even know. This is a great thing that my buddy told me, who was 8 years recovering from heroin. He was doing $600 to $1,000 a day worth of OxyContin. He was a major dealer. That's how he afforded it. My other friend spent $100,000 in 3 months on heroin. $100,000.
Mm.
And they said to me, you don't sometimes realize you have a problem until you're like, how do I want to say this? You and me both know that no one could get us better from OCD except for us.
100%.
We are the ones that, just the same thing. You could send someone to the best rehab alcoholic facility on earth. Until that person makes the internal change to want to change, it won't happen.
That
Now,
was one of the main themes in my book. Was I went through all these different therapies and failed, or I did just enough to get out, and then I would relapse and come back. It wasn't until I made the decision. My family wanted it for me. My friends wanted it for me,
of course,
but I did not want it for me
neither.
until something clicked. And you're right. I mean, people that are going through this, maybe they're listening to this, and hopefully it's going to help people, right? But you're sitting here and it's like, everybody wants this for me, and I want it for me. Why can't I get it changed? I don't know if you really want it for yourself. And I only say that because I thought I did at times, until I actually started putting in the work and then realized, oh, this is too damn hard. I don't want this. I'm just going to go back to what I'm comfortable doing. But
Exactly.
there's going to be that moment in everyone's life, and there might not be this aha moment that happens, right? Like you jumping out of a car. I don't know if that was your aha moment, but I laid up in the ICU and nearly died. They flew my parents up to base because I was supposed to not make it through the night. That wasn't my aha moment. My aha moment was sitting on my back steps years later, chain smoking myself to death with Black and Milds, drinking myself crazy, and sitting there and watching a storm come in here in Florida and being like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't like this. And that didn't mean that recovery was going to be easy, but I had made the choice. But it took me years of taking one step forward, 3 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, like until it finally got to the point where it was 10 steps forward, 1 step back, and you just keep progressing like that. But I'm glad you brought that up. That's a really, really great point.
I appreciate that. And just to give some of the listeners another view. So when you guys look at someone or watch a video like of Howard Hughes in the aviation, I didn't know until I got diagnosed. I didn't know. I thought the same thing. I'm sure I said, oh, I'm OCD when I was like 17, 18.
Yeah.
So just to give people an idea of what the disorder is like is you have a fear, an anxiety response. Then you do a compulsion to bring down the fear, like you walking around the block, waking up at a certain time, me doing the mental compulsions, constantly checking my sensation,
Yeah.
or I was playing video games 90 hours a week for avoidance. It was really bad. I had a very bad video game addiction, and then it keeps you in that cycle. Now, we both know OCD recovery is definitely possible. You can't get rid of the genetic component.
Mhm.
To give people an idea also what it's like living with chronic OCD, I was in a panic attack every moment of the day for about 17 months.
Same way. Same way.
17, every moment of every day, I was in a full-on anxiety panic attack.
If there was even a thought that I was not going to get to carry out one of my usual routines or compulsions, that sent me into a bed. It wasn't even the fact that I didn't do it, right? It was the thought that, oh my God, I have to be here for this. I might not be able to get to do that. My day's done. Like I'm
Done.
done.
Yep.
And then,
Yep.
and then it turned into the one way that I could slow down that anxiety and that panic in my head was to move faster than that anxiety and that panic, which led to compulsive exercise disorder as well, where I was just, I'm not joking, man. I was doing 1,500 burpees a day. I would do 500 in the morning, 500 on my lunch break, 500 at night. Not to mention, I would go to the gym at 2:30 in the morning before our unit PT at 5 because I didn't think that that was enough. I couldn't sleep throughout the night. I was panicky. I got into that routine where I had to do it every day, every day. Hell, I even drove off base early in the morning, went to a hotel near base, pretended I was a guest in the hotel, and went and swam laps in the pool at times. It was
That's what the disorder
bad.
does to you. Yeah, no, it's
You know, here's one
no
thing. I
joke.
don't mean to cut you off. This is,
Good.
I was thinking about the way to describe it, and you had mentioned that. This might sound very morbid, but this is to me how intensive it was. Think about the fact if you have a child and you're afraid that that child is going to die. To me, that was the same level of anxiety and panic that I had if I didn't think that I was going to be able to have a meal at the exact same time I needed to have that meal.
Yep. Yep.
That-
No, there's no other way. I can't even say anything but yes.
Crazy.
What it felt like for me is if I had a child and you had a gun to his forehead
That's it. Yep.
and
Yep.
you told me right now you're going to kill my kid in 5 seconds, shoot him right in the head. That's the anxiety response that I had going on for almost 2 years. Again, every second of every day. Now,
People might
as
be listening to this and be like, that's kind of exaggerated or
but
dramatic.
that's what it's really like.
It's really not.
Yeah.
Is it realistic? No, it's not realistic, right? But is that the feeling and the intensity of it? Absolutely. And now that I'm about to have a baby girl in a couple months, I understand now. Well, I'm going to understand a lot more in a couple months what that's really having a child and having that sensation is going to feel like. But that intensity, man, it overtakes you, and you cannot. I'm sure you couldn't focus on anything else except for what you needed to do to carry out your compulsions, right?
I had depersonalization when I was taking boards, so I felt like I was living in a simulation for about 6 months. Every second, I felt like I was looking at myself from a third person perspective for 6 months. Every day, every second of every day, depersonalization slash derealization. So, as you know, I work for Rob Bray, the owner of OCD Recovery. You've seen my videos with him, I'm assuming, or seen that I've made videos with him. So we now know that the thoughts are just thoughts pattern doesn't really cut it for chronic OCD because it could just work around that. It will just say, well, what if it's true? And this. So as you've seen plenty of my videos that I talk about, Dr. Albert Ellis created cognitive behavioral therapy. This came from what was called REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy.
Okay.
Now, Sigmund Freud basically was about the trauma was the reason why this person is depressed or anxious. The trauma, the neurophysiologic development that you may or may not have, say decreased prefrontal lobe activation, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Albert Ellis came along. He was a psychoanalyst, Freudian theory for 3 years. I think it was 53 to 56 before he invented REBT, which is now CBT. And he said, something just doesn't seem right. And this is the two examples I use to describe in a simple manner. Now, this is way more complex than this, but to give people a very simple idea. If you are standing on a train platform facing the subway, you're the next person in line, and someone is behind you poking you with a stick, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna freak out. I'm gonna kill them. They're dead. They keep poking. You turn around and the person is blind and they're hitting you with a walking stick. Now the situation didn't change. The activating event, the poking of the stick, is the same thing, but your belief just changed. You said, oh my gosh, he's blind. I'm such a dick. Oh my gosh. The belief that we hold is more than likely the primary cause of the emotional consequence that we are experiencing.
I 100% agree with you. And it just made me think of something I always joke with my wife about when we're in the car. And if someone like cuts her off or something and she like gets on the horn or she gets mad, like, what the hell's going on, right? I'm like, well, listen, plays devil's advocate. You're right to have these emotions, right? But what if they had someone that was really sick that they were trying to get to?
100%.
And I think she kind of hates it when I say that, but I mean, it's true. And honestly, listen, I get pissed off in traffic too. Like we all do. It's all, but that's a very important point that you bring up. Perception is what makes your reality.
Yes.
Right? Like
yes.
How you perceive something. Now, is it actually reality? Maybe not. But
exactly.
Perception is your reality. So if we can learn to change the perception, we can change your version of reality and how you work towards improving that. And I mean, I'm sure you're going to get into exposure therapy and things like that. I mean, that's exactly what helped me.
Exactly. So graded exposure, it's actually funny. So ERP, if anyone doesn't know, they probably won't if they don't know about obsessive compulsive disorder, but one of the gold standards for us is called ERP, exposure response prevention, AKA you expose yourself to your fears, and the response prevention is not doing the compulsion. And I guarantee we both know this, guys, ladies, when you have OCD and you don't do, and you're in the beginning of your journey and you don't perform a compulsion, it's like a lion is running after you. It is the most anxiety provoking response, but you're retraining your brain to not be afraid. And It takes a while. I always tell people this. If you think it's hard to get in shape, try changing a core belief you've had for 20 years.
Oh, that's so true. You know, this would be interesting to know what you think, but I was kind of under the impression, I'm like, okay, I get exposed to one thing that makes me uncomfortable, right? So as soon as I'm okay with that, that means I should be okay exposing myself to anything that I'm uncomfortable with, right? And that was not the case. Every incident it's all different because you hold on to different beliefs about that compulsion, right? So for me, one belief I had about getting up out of bed at the same time, right, is not the same belief I had as far as I have to have my shoes in the right order, or I have to make my meal at a certain time, or I have to walk this route this many steps every single day. They're all different beliefs. So that's why you have to continuously expose yourself all the time to different things.
Yes, for us, and we have to be more careful than the average person because we have a disorder. So we have a perception disorder in the easiest sense, where we have very, very strong black and white perfectionist irrational beliefs, and we can very easily fall back into compulsive behaviors if we don't, because you can fully recover from OCD and then relapse in 10 years. There's no reason to say you can't if you don't maintain your recovery, just like an alcoholic.
Well, and I think it's a lot easier too if you don't address what's causing you the OCD to begin with.
The fear. You have to
work through exposure therapies is not going to cure you. I didn't get cured because I got introduced to different foods I wasn't eating, or I didn't get cured because I stopped working out as much as I was compulsively. No, it was because I found out what was causing the manifestation of those things to begin with in the first place. And like Nick's saying, if you don't get to the root cause of that, right, in 10 years, you could be like, oh man, I'm 9 years, 364 days. Man, I am completely over this. It has been great. On that 10th day, on that 10th year, on that day, boom, you can resort back to it faster than you could ever imagine.
Very, 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 very quickly. And it's I think, and this is kind of how I wanted to transition from we know for a fact anxiety disorders and just life stress is on the rise everywhere.
Yeah.
We have a very, very fast moving society that is evolving in a way that we don't even know what to do. I mean, 10 years ago, the technology was nothing what it is today. It's very hard for us to keep up with this. I want to talk about this, and this is the main thing I wanted to talk about besides the OCD that we both see in our community. Fitness, health, wellness, anything. We have a very, very strong irrational belief. We've all done it. You've done it, and I've done it. It's not easy to do it. There are always going to be people that are going to say things that are evidence-based and we don't agree with. But we have a belief that we must put them down to get our point across. It is really difficult not to do this. It takes a lot of self-awareness, consciousness, and realizing that even if that person, Dr. Fung, let's use that example, even if he has said something I utterly think is completely false, he might actually have some good qualities. He might be a great father. He might donate. He might do other things, but we see him through this perspective, and we just bash and bash and bash. And it's really hard in the society on social media of just not accepting others for just their fallibility of humans. We're all not going to agree. And the more that we think as a society that everyone is supposed to think the same way, we're no longer humans. We're just robots that all think the same way.
I don't know why this just came to my mind, but let's use an example. Say someone committed some horrific crimes, right? And they spent decades in jail, right? They served their time. They got out, right? Let's say that person saved someone's life, right? Doesn't matter. They're still a criminal. That's all we're going to think of them as. Whereas somebody who does nothing but good, and we're not necessarily talking about Dr. Fung here for anybody saying, we're just saying in general, someone who's done nothing but good. They're churchgoers. They help out in the community. They do all this stuff. They've done it all their whole life. They do one thing that's wrong. It's like all of a sudden all that good stuff doesn't matter anymore.
No, that's it. We have a major problem with cancel culture.
100%.
Major.
I think it's the biggest pandemic that is going around.
Yes, absolutely. I think that,
and that's not to COVID is dangerous, but COVID will become under control. All right. Because of vaccines, because of whatever, right? Herd immunity, all this stuff. We have to make a conscious choice to get cancel culture under control. And that's what I think is going to be the hardest thing of all. Because
it's very difficult in this society, especially with people bringing up things from the past. And what happens is, what I did 5 years ago doesn't even define what I do today, 6 years later at 31. So, but we'll go back in time as a society and we'll pull up a tweet from 2011 and say, look, they are racist. And here's another very hard conversation I like to bring up with people I'm a very big believer. One of the best things in human psyche is the ability to have a conversation and disagree and be friends. That is not easy today.
Being an adult.
It's very hard. I have a lot of friends that have said to me, I've just written that person off. And I say this, I'll just say, okay, I see where you're coming from. even if I don't. I see where you're coming from to just, to level the playing field. I say, well, what happens if you guys like the same music and you could go to a concert and enjoy pizza together? But you're going to let that one view they have disrupt any future joy in that friendship.
Yeah.
And what happens is when you write people off, this is now we're talking about pure empirical data in mental health. If you start writing people off for one thing, you are creating such a low frustration environment for yourself that if things don't go your way, you're just like, I can't do it, but
You're creating an impossible environment. Like
100%. It's not reality. It's not reality.
I'm going to do something that, listen, here's a perfect example. Marriage. I'm going to do something that's going to piss off my wife at some point, right?
For sure, I do it every day.
I probably do too. She's going to do something that's going to piss me off. Does that mean that I don't want to be married to her anymore? Hell, for all intents and purposes, we have a lot of the same, all our core values and beliefs are very similar, right? Like,
yes,
I wouldn't have married her if we didn't, right? She has some different political stances than I do. Does that mean that I don't love my wife or that I don't want to be married to her? No. And it's the same thing with everybody else. Like, we cannot just focus on maybe the one thing that I don't know, that separates us and think that that's going to be what ends the relationship or ends the world. And I'm talking friendships, business, anything like that. We have to stop that. We have to understand that, you're not going to agree with everybody on every single thing. No human being ever has.
No.
And
no,
they will.
Absolutely. And so we're here. So let's just talk about it because we're already here.
Yeah.
So my wife, who I love dearly, I mean, think about this. I want everyone, anyone's still listening, to just think about what I'm about to say. My wife, it's not easy for me to say. My wife has stayed with me through my severe sex. You can imagine what difficulties that has brought on our marriage.
Yeah.
And she has stood with me because she, in her perspective, people were like, you need to leave him right now. And other people said to her, how can you leave him at his lowest moment? Exactly. And she had to think about that. And she made a decision to stay.
Story. Yeah.
I'm very thankful for her. And, she is Canadian, born and raised in Canada, different values, more conservative family. She's more, I would say she's very empathetic naturally. It took me a lot. I was the guy that was like, I don't give a shit about your feelings. You know what I mean? Like, I've had to work on that because I realized that's not always the best for conversation. So it can seem like it, but I believe now that listening to, say, someone who's more of a leftist viewpoint. I have a friend who's in my referral group. She is, I don't think they can get any more left than her. Mm-hmm. And we have business meetings one-on-one, and we talk and we laugh and we have a great time. And she pokes fun of me and I poke fun of her, and we have a really good time. Right. And I have people that say to me, literally have said, I could never have a conversation with someone like that. I said, well, you can, you just don't want to.
Right. You choose to let emotion get in the way of productivity.
Exactly. And we all are going to have difficult conversations, and we're all going to have different periods. So I have more conservative Republican views. I watch Shapiro, I watch Crowder, I watch Candace Owens. I don't watch them a lot because it can get toxic. But the one thing it can. I think Ben Shapiro's delivery is extremely toxic. I agree with his viewpoints. But he said something that I really didn't agree with one time. And he said that if you and your wife do not have the same values, it won't work. It was probably the only thing I fully 100% disagree with him on, because that's not true. It's just about accepting the other person. Eric and I have 500 things in common, let's say. If just two of them are politics and money, like, let's say she's more safe and I'm more volatile in a market setting. Yeah. Why would those two values ruin all the other 500 aspects that we agree and have joy with? But we have a society that, like we said, it's like, you don't agree on one thing, I'm never talking to you for the rest of my life. Now, listen, you are a human and you have every right to do that. But you're potentially setting yourself up for, like we said, low frustration tolerance, and not being able to have a conversation.
See, I kind of look at that more about beliefs than values. Because
I can
their
see that.
belief, and that I agree with you on, like, you can have different beliefs and still be on. Values, I look at like honesty, loyalty,
In
you know,
that regard, I see what you mean.
that stuff. So just because I do listen to Shapiro a lot too, I think that's more of what he meant instead of beliefs. But you still bring up a good point that, listen, you can disagree with people. And I know we kind of got off away from fitness and mental health, but I think it all kind of ties in, is that you can disagree with people and it actually still be healthy. Like, everybody thinks, and listen, I think this is another podcast for another time. I really, really have a firm belief that a lot of this cancel culture, a lot of, and listen, we're talking about cancel culture in terms of fitness too, not just, society and stuff like that. But I think a lot of it stems from, and I've said it for a long time, about 15 years ago, when everybody started getting participation trophies, when everybody learned that competing and losing was a bad thing. Or I shouldn't say competing is a bad thing. I should say that losing is a bad thing. And listen, people listen to this, feel free to disagree with me. I don't care.
Yeah.
This is my belief, because I am 37 years old now. I'll be 37 in November. I came from an era where you didn't get trophies unless you were the champion, right? And you know what I learned from that? Everything. I learned that I'm not always going to get my way. I learned that, you're going to put in a lot of hard work at times and you're not going to get rewarded for it. I learned that I did you talk to someone now about doing an unpaid internship and they're like, what? Do you know how many unpaid internships I did? I did one 4 years ago with Lane, and I was 32 years old, 33 years old, whatever. And I was doing an unpaid, I was an Army medic veteran. I was going back for my master's, right? And I was still doing unpaid internships because that's what was instilled upon me from my parents, right? But I just think that people are afraid of having differing views and being shunned,
Yes.
right? And you can't do that. I have clients I have differing views with, right? I have, family members, I have friends, everything. But you know what? I look at that as a strength. And that is where that perception, right, has to come in. People might look at that and perceive that as a negative. I perceive that as a positive. There's a lot of people that I talk to that I'm close friends with that I do not agree one single bit with anything that they talk about politically or that they believe in and other stuff. But you know what? They're a damn cool person when we don't talk about that shit, right?
Of course.
And you set boundaries. And I think with OCD, this is a great way to tie it back into OCD, is you have to set boundaries with yourself. For me, I now know, because of therapy and putting in the work, where my boundaries are for certain things. Doesn't mean I don't still have my bad days. Doesn't mean that I don't still have thoughts that pop up. But I'm strong enough now to know where my boundary is and when I need to ask for help, right? And I'm sure you went through that with your rehab as well, is just getting to know yourself better. And that's part of it, is recognizing, like we talked about, what's going on the inside, what's causing you to have this compulsion, right? Because you might have the gene, right? But we all have genes for cancer, and they don't all get expressed.
No, they
right?
don't.
Your lifestyle plays a huge factor in that, and understanding where's your limit. And I know my limits now. You know your limits now. So to kind of wrap this all up, where can people reach out, other than just listening to this podcast? Where can people reach out for help with OCD? You said you work with a OCD.
So Rob, OCD Recovery UK. OCD Recovery UK is his Instagram name.
Okay.
He arguably, in my opinion, which is a slightly also biased, I will have to be honest, he understands OCD better than anyone on earth. He's being referred people who are top psychiatrists for people they can't get better. The reason why Rob had 10 years of debilitating OCD. I don't want to put any therapists or psychologists down. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. There is an unspoken rule in mental health and addiction. Going through it yourself will probably give you a better insight into helping people than someone who's just a researcher, because we know the daily struggle that they might not be able to see.
Mm-hmm.
So OCDrecovery.com, OCD Recovery UK is a great resource for just rational living through cognitive behavioral therapy, seeing things from a rational perspective. I would say if you're going to look at books, I think anyone can benefit from these two books. Paul David's At Last a Life. He suffered with 10 years of GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, where he had anxiety pumping every second of the day for a decade. I mean, I only had it for 18 months. I can't imagine 10 years.
Mine was like five or
Yes,
6 years. It's horrible.
exactly. So, and it became a normal thing. He recovered. His book is amazing. It shows about why people stay stuck with just irrational fears, not OCD related.
Yeah.
Claire Weeks is a researcher. She died, I think, a while ago. She is basically what they call the godmother of anxiety research.
Okay.
She started like the real clinical trials in the UK. The book is called Self-Help for Your Nerves. It is a gold standard in anxiety recovery books.
Yeah.
The other book I think that anyone could benefit from is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Have you ever heard of that book?
I've heard of that book. I've never read it, but I've at
Holocaust
least heard of
survivor.
that one.
He's a psychiatrist who was in Holocaust for 3 years. He was in Auschwitz. Everyone died. I mean, he lost his wife, his kids, his family. Everyone got burned. He came out, and his philosophy on life was the meaning that we put to life will drive us no matter how painful anything we're going through. He said when he was in Auschwitz, he watched people give up hope. Even though he said he knew his family was more than likely dead,
Yeah.
the meaning of life, of seeing them again, pushed him through years of hard labor and torture. Really good book. I think prospectively looking, and this isn't to put anyone down because people do look at this, I think they're like, oh, well, you're using that I said, no, it's not just that. But if I'm having like a bad day with maybe like I got mad at a patient,
Yeah.
maybe I'll think about someone who's been in an iron lung their whole life, or someone that has been born blind, or muscular dystrophy, or lost their legs in Iraq, or something like that.
For sure, man.
These situations that we overlook can help bring perspective that like you said, life is not fair.
Right.
Life will never and is not fair. No one really deserves anything, because if that was true, kids wouldn't get cancer. First place trophies are probably the only people that need trophies, because if you believe in participation
I don't
points,
need a trophy to remind me that I didn't win.
no, life is filled with losing. We know that. Most of the, anecdotally speaking, in my opinion, you have the potential to learn way more from your failures than your wins.
Oh yeah, you rest. You're content when you win.
And there's nothing inherently.
I'm pissed
wrong
when I
with that.
lose.
Yeah, exactly. When you lose, it can help you redirect in a path to progressive change.
And then I think that also goes with, your mind can either be your most valuable tool or your worst enemy.
For sure.
And
yeah.
it's up to you. It's up to you. Is it going to be easy all the time? Hell no.
Hell no.
It took me a good 3 to 4 years of going through therapy, failing, doing just enough, just going through the motions so I can get out so that I could just fail again. It took me a good 3 or 4 years of going through that, not to mention the health issues just from anorexia and all that I had to go through recovering. It's not going to be an overnight success, right? But part of the reason I wrote the book was to show that the road of recovery is not a linear progression. It's okay, you're going good. Oh, I'm gonna take a detour this way for a little bit. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna go back here for a little bit. I'm gonna whoop around, go a little bit more forward, and then do it all again until eventually you wake up one day and you just realize, man, I appreciate life. I enjoy having control back over my life and not feeling like, whatever is going on inside of me has the control, right? So
Absolutely.
it's retaking control, kind of like you do with your compulsions, but in a healthier way because of that perspective that you have now.
At 100%. And I think this is a good way to end it on my part. If anyone wants to make a change in their life, whether it's a belief you had, whether it's a habit you have, whether it's an addiction,
Yeah.
it's very important to highlight why we talk about losing. This is what Rob says in OCD Recovery. We like to think that journeys are linear.
Mm-hmm.
They're never linear. We like to think that they're up and down, which would still be nice. Journeys are like this. There's back steps and peaks and troughs and failures and falling on your face. But the more that you believe that it has to come easy to you,
Yeah.
the more it eludes you. Because my friends who are 8 to 10, 15 years sober from heroin and alcohol, severe alcohol usage. One of my buddies would not mind me saying this. He was drinking a sleeve of Fireball shooters a day and 24 PBRs every day and snorting heroin. And yeah, he knows that he has to be vigilant 7 years later.
Yeah.
You know, it's a
If you don't
journey.
keep it in the forefront of your mind, it's going to take over your mind and you are going to
Exactly.
lose
It's
it. You know what? I
yes.
think this is the best way to sum up what recovery is like. And you just said something that made me think about it. Those crazy ass straws when you're a kid that loop all
Yes.
around and stuff, right?
Yes.
So eventually the pop or whatever it is you're drinking through it, it's going to end up in your mouth, right? But it's going to take all these crazy, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see what I'm saying. And hopefully you guys all remember these crazy loopy straws that your parents used to give you because it was exciting when you were a kid, right? That's your road to recovery. You're eventually going to get to the end if you stick with it long enough, but it ain't going to be pretty. It's not going to be like those straight McDonald's straws you see now. It's going to be like those loopy ones you got as a kid. So keep plugging on, guys. I don't care if you had sex addiction, or if you had obsessive compulsive like exercise disorder or food, or maybe it's gambling, whatever it is, there's always the same root cause. It's a control issue. Find out why you feel like you don't have control and why it's manifesting into whatever activity it is for you. Seek help. All right. Nick, I'm going
Don't
to
be
put all your
afraid to seek help.
information in the stuff below, but I can't thank you enough. This is an important conversation. I think that the more we can get out there talking about this and bringing light to it, hopefully helps even just one person reach out and ask for help before it's too late.
And I appreciate it. And I'm going to end it on this last thing because I think this is the next podcast I want to really, when we have one, this could be an hour. And I want to talk about, as I've made the post, why making fitness your entire life is more than likely not healthy for
Absolutely.
most people.
No, that's a great topic for our next.
Because I think a lot of my friends who are competitors and people can fall down the rabbit hole of judgment and self-hatred and comparing each other to everyone who's an IFBB pro. And it is such an unrealistic expectation. That's the next talk I think you and me would have a great talk about.
Boom.
Thank you so much for having me on, though. Seriously.
No, dude, it was great. I'm glad that we got to do this. And guys, thank you guys for tuning in. If you're listening to iTunes, Spotify, or if you're watching us on YouTube, I really appreciate it. If you guys have any questions about anything, you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section below on YouTube. Nick, where can they find you on social media?
So our handle is just Axon Health, AXON Health, one word. We have a schedule. So 7 days a week, we do, exercise videos, tips, stuff like that. We do mental health stuff. We talk about the importance of balance. I really like our Habit Friday videos. We talk about financial literacy, business literacy. We really hit health, as you talked about in your post, I think today or yesterday, from all angles.
Yeah. What is healthy? What does it mean to be healthy?
And that's basically the main thing. We don't really focus too much on YouTube right now. Basically, the main social media platform we have on a daily upload is our Instagram. And as I always tell people, I'm always up for discussion. If anyone doesn't agree with me, I'm down to have a discussion. Even if you tell me I'm an idiot or I'm a quack because I'm a chiropractor, I'm not here to change your mind. You already have a belief, but I'll still have a conversation with you. You know, so
Absolutely. That's what it's all about, man. And that's what this podcast is about, is to bring on people to have conversations and get our brains thinking in a different way. So, man, this is great. Guys, all Nick's information will be in the description box below, either on YouTube or iTunes. Thanks again, man. It was great talking to you.
thank
And
you, man.
if you guys can help me out by hitting the subscribe button and sharing this, I'd really appreciate it. I'll be back soon with another guest. I think you guys will really enjoy the upcoming guest list as well. So, Nick, you take care, man. It's good seeing you.
Later, my man.
All right. And guys, thanks again for tuning in. We appreciate it.
Later, bud.